Hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar series on extending your business boundaries. My name is Jason Huynh and I'm a senior consultant at OBS, where my main areas of focus are in information and knowledge management. Just a quick overview of what we'll be talking about today. Obviously we're going to be talking about extranets, but what I want to do to begin with is just redefine what an extranet is, as over the years the extranet has really evolved to include many extra workloads. So I just want to take some time to look at the state of play for extranets, which will hopefully set the scene for the rest of the presentation. What we'll then look at is some of the business drivers and objectives for really investing in an extranet, where we'll try to give you some concrete examples of the business value that you can gain by deploying an extranet solution. And then finally, to close things off, we'll steer the discussion towards delivering your extranet on the cloud and the types of considerations that you need to make before deploying to the cloud. So without further ado, let's ask ourselves this question: what is a SharePoint extranet? Now, in a similar vein to intranets, over the years the definition of an extranet has really become more and more elusive. From the humble beginnings of a simple informational website for external parties, the extranet has really evolved to include things like collaboration features and social features, document management features, e-forms, and even full-blown web-based applications. And it's also really become integral and a part of an organization's greater information and knowledge management strategy. So trying to pin down a definition of an intranet using just features is a difficult exercise, as an extranet, particularly in the context of a SharePoint one, has really evolved to become more of a platform for your external users. Now, being a platform has its pros and cons. Being a platform means that SharePoint is supremely flexible in being able to cater for many different types of extranet services, but its rich feature set and flexibility also means that it's very tempting to deliver an extranet with all the bells and whistles in one hit, and in doing so your projects for extranets often lack focus, and also in doing so they are seldom successful, as your business objectives are unclear. So to combat this, it's best to approach an extranet in phases. For example, as a first phase, you can deliver a simple informational portal that just delivers news, events, and general collateral to your users. Then, as your users become more familiar and acquainted with the platform, you can introduce other workloads such as collaboration spaces and social features. This way, each phase is clear and has measurable business outcomes, and new services are introduced when users are ready for them or when there is a real business imperative to do so. Now, we've presented the phases in this particular order, but there's really nothing stopping you from delivering a collaboration or delivering the collaboration features as a first phase. The point that we're trying to make is that SharePoint is not a point solution delivering on X. It's an extranet platform that can deliver on X, Y, and Z. So what you really need to do is find where the sweet spot is with SharePoint, and whether or not that sweet spot will align with your business goals. Another way to look at an extranet is in the type of audience it caters for. Now, traditionally extranets have always catered for an organization's partners, but we are seeing an increasing trend for extranets to also cater for an organization's customer base, where they're really trying to use the extranet as a vehicle to try and elicit valuable feedback from their customers. So from a user's perspective, we have extranets that cater for both B2B and B2C scenarios, where really the overarching aim is to provide the services that these users need so that they become first-class citizens of your organization, where you're really trying to empower your external users to gain access to the information and services in the same manner as your own staff. Now, sure, it may be just a subset of the types of information and services that your internal staff get, but the point is to provide the same ease of access to those external users. So basically what we've done in the last couple of slides is really shifted the definition of the extranet beyond just a simple informational website. What we've essentially said is that the modern SharePoint Extranet starts with obviously the SharePoint platform, and on that platform we can build different types of services such as information services, collaboration services, social services, and even full-blown applications. Now, those services can cater for both B2B and B2C scenarios, and as I alluded to before, the overarching aim is really to empower your partners and customers to become first-class citizens of your organization. Excuse me. Now, this is essentially what a modern SharePoint Extranet looks like. So, okay, that's what a modern day extranet looks like, but what are some of the business drivers for building an extranet? And when we ask ourselves that question, there's really a number of factors at play that is driving the demand for extranets. And these are the increasing speed at which the information economy is running at, this idea of the consumerization of IT, and the relating need to engage our partners and customers. And we'll talk about each of these points in the next couple of slides. So when we talk about the speed of the information economy, what we are referring to is the increasing pace of really doing business, and how so much of our businesses are now highly dependent on the availability of quality information in a timely manner. So in essence, what we're trying to say when we say the speed of the information economy is that it has become increasingly important to streamline the delivery of information to those that need it. And really, when we think about it this way, it's really just a symptom of the times we're in. You know, today we live in an information economy, but back when information was less critical to the running of businesses, they just streamlined other things that made sense to them and had the greatest business value. So, for example, Henry Ford used the assembly line to streamline the production of Model Ts. And nowadays, many mining companies use logistics to streamline the delivery of resources to maximize their profit. In the same way, we are seeing a greater demand to use technology to streamline the delivery of information. Now, inside an organization, we have the intranet to do this, but with the increased need to collaborate with partners and clients, the extranet is becoming the vehicle for streamlining the delivery of information to those users. Now, I'll give you a familiar B2B example where the streamlining of information is critical to both parties. I actually have a friend who's a mortgage broker, which for the sake of this example we'll call her Kim, and her job is to basically get the best loan deal possible for her clients. Now, clients go to Kim because they don't want to independently deal with each bank, but also go to her with the expectation that she will have all the information at hand to provide them with the best advice. So basically the kind of service expected of Kim is as if she worked for any of the big four banks. So from Kim's perspective, she needs timely access to the latest information on things like interest rates, new offers and products, and the ability to download the latest forms. Now, as it so happens, each of the big four banks do provide extranet services, and they do provide that type of information to people like Kim. And again, if you think about it from the bank's perspective, it is in their best interest to provide Kim with that type of information, as she is essentially bringing in new business for them. And when you think about it that way, banks actually use their extranet services to better enable the brokering industry, and as a result, what they're doing is extending their reach to a greater set of potential customers. So, using the extranet, what banks have actually done is they've effectively mobilized an army of brokers without a huge investment on their part on extra branches or staff. So as you can see, banks have really realized the power of the extranet and have really done so for a very long time, and they're using it to great effect. Another key driver for extranets is this idea of the consumerization of IT. And One of the defining characteristics of the consumerization of IT is the ability for users to BYO technology. And in an extranet scenario, this is all the truer, because while on an intranet behind your firewalls you may be able to dictate the type of technology that is used, in an in an extranet scenario, this becomes impossible and indeed undesirable, as your external users really expect the ability to consume and react to information on any device, anywhere, and at any time. Another key characteristic coming from the consumerization of IT is the need to really engage your users. Now, beyond merely being consumers of information, your users are now expecting to engage with your information and your brand. Now, this isn't just a Gen Y thing, and it's not about replicating the Facebook experience. It's realizing that our partners and customers can also be a valuable source of information, and trying to elicit information from them and really engage them. So, yes, you can build an extranet with Facebook-like experience, but better engagement can be as simple as providing a channel to ask questions and providing a channel to provide comment, give feedback, give ratings, and make suggestions. So really what we're seeing is the extranet is becoming a vehicle to engage your users and really becoming a key part of your innovation strategy. Consider what GE had to say on a recent report on innovation. Now, they said that 80% of top executives agreed their organizations need to innovate differently, and 86% say that partnerships and collaboration are the key to this. They go on to say that for innovation to flourish, we must embrace a new innovation paradigm that promotes collaboration between all players, big, small, public and private, that fosters creativity. And it's really realizing that innovation goes beyond the walls of the organization, and the importance of the partner and customer channel in providing inspiration for innovation, especially in an economical climate where R&D funds are drying up. And although the report never explicitly states that you should be using an extranet to drive this type of innovation, I think it's clear that an extranet is actually well placed as a vehicle to build deeper and more meaningful relationships with your partner and customer base that will help drive innovation within your company. I'll give you another example of a company using an extranet to really engage their partner channels. Some of you may have heard of Nintex. Nintex is actually a sister company of ours that creates products for SharePoint. Now, their business model is one that relies very heavily on their partner channel to sell their products. And realizing this, Nintex extranet site for partners provides a whole bevy of features to their partner audience. On their extranet site, you can go there to find things like news on new products and upcoming events, sales and technical collateral, free training, and a means to even track your sales. So, as you can see, Nintex uses their extranet site to really engage their partners with their brand and their products, and try to elicit feedback on existing and potential products that will help them drive their innovation. So just to recap, there are clear business drivers for building an extranet, and that is the need to streamline the delivery of information in an economy that is increasingly reliant on timely access to information. There's also the idea of the consumerization of IT, driving the expectation of information being readily available, and the relating need to better engage our partners and customers to drive innovation. And this is essentially where the value prop is, the value proposition for extranet. So let's just assume for a second that I've done an awesome job at selling you the importance of an extranet in the last couple of slides, and now you're keen to start a project to build an extranet. Now, extranets by their nature appear to be prime candidates for hosting in the cloud, but there are some key considerations that you need to make to help assess whether to host your solution on-prem, that is on-premise, in your own company, or in the cloud. So what are some of those key considerations? There's users authentication that we need to think about, and really what this is talking about is how to manage your internal and external users' login experience. There's also the question of whether to host your extranet solution with a local Australian provider or going all in with the cloud. There's also the question of whether or not there's a need to access other line of business systems, and there's also the question of some of the limitations of Sandbox Code if you do choose to use Office 365 as your extranet provider. And we'll talk more around the details of each of these points in the next couple of slides. So user authentication is usually a biggie. It's usually one of the first things that people think about when they build an extranet. And what we're really talking about here is what the login experience will be for your internal and external users and how they will be managed. So in this example that I've got here on the slide, we've got an on-premise scenario where you're hosting the extranet solution within your own company. In this scenario, authentication for your internal users is fairly straightforward, as it wouldn't be any different to logging onto the intranet, for example. But if you want to replicate that experience for your external users, that would require quite a bit of work on your part, as you would probably need to invest in setting up a separate login mechanism. And then your external users would also need to remember a separate username and password. Without going into too much detail, I think it's suffice to say that setting up an extranet and the relating login mechanism is actually quite a time-consuming and costly exercise. Now, comparing this to hosting your extranet in the cloud, and you can see what we've effectively done is outsource the whole responsibility of authenticating and managing your external users to the cloud provider. Now, in this example here on our slide, we've chosen to host our extranet on Office 365, and you can see that our external user, rather than using an internal system to log into the extranet, is actually using a Windows Live account that is maintained by Microsoft. Themselves. Now, looking at this example here, you might be thinking, now, doesn't that just reverse the issue, because now my internal users are going to need a Windows Live account to log on to the extranet, and they're not going to be happy about that. But the answer is Microsoft actually provides a solution called ADFS, or Active Directory Federation Services, that allows your internal users to log into the cloud servers using their existing login and password. So user authentication is really one of those key considerations that you need to be thinking about when considering whether to push your extranet to the cloud. And it is in fact quite a compelling reason for moving to the cloud, as you simplify your authentication systems by having a clear line of division between your internal and external users. There's also the added benefit of not needing to rely on your IT department to manage those external users. Now, if you do decide on delivering your extranet in the cloud, another thing to think about is whether to host your extranet with a local provider, that is a local Australian provider, or go all in with the cloud. Now, as I said, both can really be considered as cloud solutions, but what will probably drive your decision is most likely in the licensing costs and the issue of data sovereignty. Now, with licensing, a local provider usually provides you with two options, give or take. You either rent the server space and you bring your own SharePoint licensing to the party, or you rent the server space and the licensing altogether in one package. Now, the hoster will often look after your backups, but then you tend to need to look after the SharePoint environment yourself. Office 365, on the other hand, is a fully maintained service by Microsoft, and you pay for it on a per user per month basis. So it's like paying your mobile bill or paying your cable bill. I think it's suffice to say that licensing can get quite complicated very quickly. And so if you do decide on going to the cloud, we can certainly help you make that cost analysis based on your specific needs. The other thing that you need to think about if you are to go to the cloud is the issue of data sovereignty. And what that basically means is that your organization may have specific policies dictating where your company data can reside. And for Australian customers, if you are going to invest in Office 365, your data will actually reside in the Singapore data center. So if your company has strict rules around data sovereignty, this may have an impact on your hosting options and where your extranet is actually going to be living. Another key thing to think about when you're thinking about deploying your extranet in the cloud is whether or not you need to bring in information and data from other line of business systems like CRM, which are typically behind your firewall or hosted within your organization. Now, Office 365 does provide a service called BCS that allows you to connect to your on-premise line of business systems, but there are obvious caveats around this particular service, so you really need to sit down to figure out the type of data and the type of systems you're connecting to, and whether or not BCS will be able to achieve those requirements. Then finally, what you need to consider is the limitations around Sandbox Code. Sandbox Code refers to the code that runs on an Office 365 environment, but runs with limited capabilities. And the best analogy to explain what Sandbox Code is to think about an apartment building scenario, where basically in that scenario you're sharing the basic infrastructure like plumbing, electricity cabling and cable TV, and they're all things that you cannot change and you cannot touch, but within the walls of your apartment you are basically free to do anything you want. And if you want to use any of those underlying services like electricity, for example, you are billed accordingly. That exact same concept applies to Office 365, where you're essentially a tenant using shared infrastructure. And the reason why you need to use Sandbox Code is that it limits what you can do so that the health of the shared infrastructure is really safeguarded. What that basically means for you when you're considering whether or not to deploy your extranet in 365 is that you need to take a step back and consider what your roadmap will be for your extranet. If your roadmap contains really complex business requirements that may require heavy custom development, then you really need to consider whether that is achievable through Sandbox Code. And the outcome of that analysis may sway you back to an extranet deployed with an Australian hoster or on your own premises. So just to recap, the key considerations that you need to make when considering the cloud is user authentication and how to manage your internal and external users' login experience. Another thing to think about is whether to host your solution with an Australian provider or in the cloud. Then you need to think about whether you need to access any other line of business systems and suck in or draw in information from those sources, and the limitations around BCS. And then obviously you need to think about how you can use Sandbox Code or not use Sandbox Code for that matter in an Office 365 scenario. So having said all that, we may have come across as a bit negative towards Office 365, but I guess the point that we're trying to make, and the truth is, you really need to sit down and assess what your business requirements are and weigh them up against what 365 does and provides. If you sit down and think about it and look at your extranet roadmap, and it's starting to look a lot like the likes of the Nintex portal that we showed you before, where there's heavy integration with CRM to bring in sales information, then an on-premise or a locally hosted option may be your better option. But if your extranet requirements are looking more like the systems of engagement that General Electric were alluding to in their innovation report, then we think that that is really where Office 365's sweet spot is. So it's really about, if you're wanting an extranet that provides things like news and events, areas where people can start discussions on topical subjects, and really areas and sites where people can collaborate on ideas and projects. If that's what you're wanting, then Office 365 is perfect for that. And really together, when you use Office 365 with products like Nintex Workflow and Nintex Live, you can start to do things like initiate actions from your on-premise intranet to have an impact on Office 365. So, for example, what you can do is from your intranet you can start a workflow or kick off an action that will actually create an Office 365 site and start populating it with things like blog posts and documents. Because most of the time the things that you want to be putting on your extranet originate from your intranet. So as you can see, we can start to build pretty compelling solutions where you can start to push your content from your intranet to the cloud and have that information synced between your intranet and your extranet. Okay, so that brings us to the conclusion of this presentation on extending your business boundaries. We hope it's been informative and given you some ideas on the business value of building extranets to help engage your partner and customer communities. And hopefully it's given you some ideas on the possibilities of building your extranet in the cloud. If you do have any further questions or would like us to come have a chat to you about extranet solutions, feel free to contact your business development manager, if indeed you have one, or just head on over to our OBS website for our contact details. So thanks again, and we'll chat again soon.